We're standing in front of the skull of Triceratops. This skull was collected from Hell Creek, Montana, from deposits of late Cretaceous age, about 66 million years ago. Triceratops lived in large numbers just prior to the extinction that closed the Cretaceous. The skull was collected by the Amherst College expedition of 1929. Some of the skull has been reconstructed, but quite large amounts of it are real. The lower jaw is a cast and is put there to help you understand how the jaw and the skull went together. Triceratops belongs to a group of ornithischian dinosaurs called ceratopsians. Ceratopsians are generally named for their horns, but not all ceratopsians had horns. They are actually defined by the toothless rostral bone at the front of the skull. This was actually just anterior to the premaxilla and would have bitten against the predentary bone in the lower jaw in a beak-like manner. So generally, ceratopsians look parrot-like in their appearance. Another characteristic that is common but not universal in ceratopsians is the presence of a frill. The frill is the enlarged area behind the eyes and horns, and it is formed by the parietal and squamosal bones, which have elongated very greatly. There's a lot of debate about the function of the frill in ceratopsians. People have made a number of suggestions, such as protection of the neck, or perhaps it was brightly colored as an ornamentation in display with other members of the same species. Many ceratopsians had open frills. In other words, the frill was simply a framework with an open space within the frill, and some had large projections from the frill, which almost certainly would suggest some kind of ornamentation. Another suggestion has been that the frill would reorient the jaw musculature and give it better leverage in closing the jaw. Regardless, the frill is one of the most dramatic aspects of the ceratopsian dinosaurs. Triceratops had 3 horns. One pair is above the eye. These are called the brow horns. And then there's a third single horn above the nose. We call this the nasal horn. These horns are often compared with, say, those of rhinoceroses, since they are sharp, and they may have been used partly in defense, but most likely they were also used in some interactions between members of the same sex within the species. Although we do not have a skeleton of a ceratopsian, a complete skeleton of a ceratopsian, you can perhaps visualize below the skull or behind the skull a quadrupedal animal with the hind limbs longer than the forelimbs, but a very heavy-bodied quadruped that would probably be moving across the terrain at moderate speeds. If you look at the jaws, you can see that the teeth are fairly crowded in the rear part of the jaw, just as they are in the dinosaur Gryposaurus on the wall to your right. The teeth, however, are quite different in morphology than those of the hadrosaur Gryposaurus. And in fact, the crowding and the morphology of the teeth of ceratopsians evolved separately from the crowding in hadrosaurs, and the jaw mechanics are actually somewhat different. Below and behind the eye, you can see an opening. This is a remnant of the lateral temporal fenestra. Dinosaurs all begin with 2 pairs of temporal fenestrae, one higher and one more to the side on the skull. However, in ceratopsians, the enlargement of the frill has closed off a lot of the temporal fenestrae, so really the only remnant that you can see here is the small opening there. The nasal opening, on the other hand, is extremely large. Looking here at the skull of Triceratops, you can then perhaps envision a large sort of rhino-like animal with large horns, as potentially a protective or aggressive device, a frill to do something remarkable, which we don't know exactly what it did on the rear part of the skull, and a dental apparatus for grinding food in the rear part of the skull after it was cropped by the toothless front of the jaws.